Hello and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling in from. I'm looking forward to today's session, Co-Selling with Confidence. We're just going to give everybody about a minute or two more to join. So bear with us and we'll start here in about 60 to 90 seconds. And if you have any questions as we're going through this, feel free to use the Q&A you've got there. And we will try and address any questions we can as we go along, and we'll have some time at the end. So with that, though, we'll get started in about 1 minute. While we're waiting, I'd love to hear where you're dialing in from. So if you want to drop in the chat where you're dialing in from, or in the chat is turned off. So in the Q&A, you can drop it in there. Excellent. Okay, well let's jump in and we'll get started. So before I get into the substance of today's session, what I want to tell everybody is what we're not going to be covering today. So what I don't want to have is missed expectations. Um, this is not a walkthrough of Partner Center. It's not a training on how to submit referrals. And it's not about adding more activity to your already busy days. What this session is it's designed to be a diagnostic. Most Microsoft partners are doing a lot of good work, but they're not getting consistent pipeline from Microsoft. You know, they know their delivery is strong. You know that your customers are getting the outcomes that they want, but you're not seeing the level of engagement from Microsoft sellers. And that engagement doesn't match the level of capability that you have inside of your business. And that's really where we want to focus today. So if that gap feels familiar to you, then these next 30 or 40 minutes will be something that you've probably thought about in the past, but have never put words to it. And that's what I want to share with you all today. So if that sounds like the right place for you and you're in the right place, then let's get started by talking about the pattern that we see. So think of it this way: you've earned the certifications, you've got your solution designation, you may even have your specializations, you've joined the programs, you've attended the briefings, you're even submitting the referrals. You're working on building relationships. And at the end of the day, and your business is taking this Microsoft relationship seriously. It's not a side project for you. It's not just something you're doing because you have to. You've invested real time, real money, and real organizational energy into making that Microsoft relationship produce results for you, but haven't felt that. And underneath all of that, whether you say it out loud or not, there's an expectation. We expect as a partner community that if we're putting in this blood, sweat, and tears, that if I do what matters there, what Microsoft matters, then that momentum, that engagement should follow. But here's the part that most partners rarely acknowledge or say out loud is that you can do all of the right things and still feel invisible. Not rejected, feel invisible. And those are two very different things. And I want to be clear on that the problem I see in the partner community. It's not that you're careless. You're not ignoring the rules. The activity was there, the effort was real, and still that system inside of Microsoft didn't respond in the way that you had hoped or that you had expected. And so for the rest of today, we're going to address that gap. That's what this session is all about, is addressing the gap between what you're doing and why you feel invisible in that Microsoft ecosystem. So with that, you know, again, I've watched this pattern repeat across partners of every size, different solution areas, different geographies, different team structures. And the the constant is that most partners that we meet with have a strong delivery engine, have real customer outcomes, have genuine capabilities. And the sad part of that is that their Microsoft pipeline is either flat, sporadic, or really impossible to attribute anything in a repeatable way or fashion that our sales teams and our top of funnel expectations can rely on. So when that gap persists, many CEOs or founders or business leaders or group leaders diagnose it in one of two ways. The first way is that they either need better visibility with Microsoft sellers. So they just think, oh, if I just knew more Microsoft people and more Microsoft people were seeing us, we need more presence, we need more awareness, more of the right people knowing who we are. So that's the first diagnosis that I hear from leaders inside of the Microsoft partner community. The second diagnosis that I hear is that we need the right introductions. We need the right contact. We need the right sponsor, the right warm handoff inside of Microsoft. And both of these are absolutely reasonable. They sound reasonable. They feel reasonable. But I believe that they point in the wrong direction. The problem isn't visibility. The problem isn't a single relationship. The problem is that most partners that I speak with are not running a structured motion, and no amount of visibility or relationship building is going to compound and grow your Microsoft footprint without that type of a structured motion to move your business forward. And that's the diagnosis that this session is built around. That once you see it clearly, a lot of what you felt, random or unexplainable becomes very predictable, stops feeling random. It's very clear why you're not getting that traction. So with that, let's jump in and talk about the visibility diagnosis. Again, it feels very logical. If more people knew who we were, we would be in business. We would be, laughing all the way to the bank. But if sellers don't know you, we need to fix that. And so you invest in presence. You go to events. You get introductions. You make sure your name is in the room. You'll head out to Las Colinas. You'll do whatever it takes. You'll host things at Microsoft offices or join the events that are going on. Like we just had the AI World Tour there, and you feel like if you get there, that's going to help fix your visibility problem. And it's not wrong. I mean, visibility matters. But here's what experience has taught me, and I hope to be able to teach you, is about visibility without structure behind it. The sellers that we want to work with, that you as a Microsoft partner want to work with, they're not free agents out there looking for new partners all the time. They're moving from meeting to meeting, from deal to deal. They're under a significant amount of quota pressure. And when a seller is deciding who to bring into an active opportunity, they're not browsing out there. They're not saying, oh, let's go find a new partner to do this. They're defaulting. They're defaulting to the partner they already know how to use, the one they can explain to their manager without a lengthy justification, the one, and most importantly, in my opinion, the one who reduces their risk, not adds to it. And this is why I really challenge that visibility diagnosis, because more visibility does not change that calculus. It does not change that equation. What changes that equation is making the seller's decision to bring you in feel obvious and low risk. That's not a visibility problem. It's a positioning and emotion problem. Yeah. I've had the good fortune of being in the Microsoft partner ecosystem for 20 plus years. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rob Fagan. And again, I have spent years in this ecosystem, both as an individual contributor, as an employee, as a founder and an owner of a Microsoft partner. So I've had an opportunity to see this firsthand. And a few years back, I had a really interesting experience that kind of lit me up to this. Was I was in Las Colinas, and this was the days, back in 2015, 2016, when it was more normal to have all of the Microsoft sellers in the office. You could get into the cafeteria. You would have that visibility. And I was, there for an event one day, had an opportunity to go out for drinks afterwards, and I asked one of the sellers, "It's why does he keep pulling in the same partners, deal after deal? And why couldn't I get a shot at what the work he was doing in the area he was focused on?" And he basically just looked at me and said, "Look, dude, I do not have time to figure out who the best partners, the new partners are out there. I've got to get deals done. You know, I like to go to these events and meet people, but when it comes down to it, the brass tacks of it, I've got to get deals done. I've got to trust that the partner I handed off to can get that deal done." And for me personally, that was sort of a reflective moment, or a sort of one of those moments where you're like, aha, light bulb moment. And this guy wasn't saying anything personal. He had nothing against the company, my company at that time. It was purely operational. And visibility wasn't going to solve that operational problem. So that was the first sort of aha moment. The next thing that really struck me was the relationship diagnosis. For me, that was even more seductive. It was more appealing than the visibility one, because relationships, they absolutely matter. And I'll talk about this and give you my perspective on it. But that perspective is not to say that relationships do not matter. They absolutely do. They are important, they are critical, and you have to build them, foster them, nurture them. But here's what experience has taught me, and again, that I want to share with you, is that relationships as your primary Microsoft strategy are a huge risk to you and to your sales motion and to your business at large, because it's going to be no surprise to anybody on this call. If you've been in the Microsoft ecosystem for any length of time, you know that people move, territories shift, reorgs happen, incentives reset, you know, the list goes on. And we are only a matter of days away from this happening again. We'll hit July 1st here in what, 34, 35 days. And this will happen again. And it will happen consistently every year. Yeah. Personally, I've had quarters where I felt deeply connected to the field, active conversations, sharing pipeline, built real trust. And then with one stroke of the pen or one July 1st, and all of that shifts. And for me, it was almost like overnight, an entire team got displaced inside of Microsoft, and that changed my whole world. I went from that active, sort of always engaged, trusted, to now looking for handoffs to new partners or to new sellers that had never worked with me. So literally overnight, everything went quiet. And it wasn't that they didn't like what I had done or was doing. It's not that there was any hostility or anything negative. It was just a reset on their end. And that changed who I was going to be working with overnight. And that's the fragility of the relationship first motion. If you believe that resting your strategy on the relationship is your secret to success, I'm here to tell you that it is an incredibly risky strategy. So, with that, I want to remind everybody I'm not arguing against relationships. Relationships are essential, but those relationships are not your system. They are an output of the system. And when the motion is right, the relationships can form, they can compound because sellers trust how you show up, not because they had dinner with you last week or last month or over at Ignite, whatever it might be. So the partners who get consistent pipeline from Microsoft are not always the ones that have built the best relationships. They're the ones whose motion makes sellers want to pull them in, regardless of who the seller is, so that you could move laterally across a team and still be able to deliver that same experience. And that's what a structured motion produces, that the relationship on its own can't. Because can you be successful? You absolutely can be successful on a relationship. But again, it is a incredibly risky strategy because those relationships can and most likely will change inside of Microsoft. So everything we've talked about so far points here. The certifications, the programs, the referrals, the relationships, the visibility plays. None of it is wrong, but on its own, it is not a system. And here's the uncomfortable truth about that is that working inside of a large organization like Microsoft, they don't reward hustle. They reward predictability. Sellers aren't evaluating partners on effort. Nobody says to you, oh, I'm so glad you worked all night last night, or that you put in 10, 14-hour days in a row. What they're evaluating partners on is fit. Can they explain why this partner belongs in this deal? Do they know exactly when to pull you in? Do you make their job easier or do you make their job harder? And if the answers to those questions are unclear or even slightly unclear, the seller is going to default to someone else. Not because you're less capable, but because you're less predictable. And that's what a structured motion makes you is predictable. It's what makes a seller's decision to bring you in feel obvious rather than risky. It's what makes your pipeline consistent rather than sporadic. And here's the part that matters most for this room here, for all of us as Microsoft partners, is that most partners are not running a structured motion. Not because they're not serious about the business, not because they don't care, It's because nobody has ever showed us as a Microsoft partner community what it takes to look like, or what a structured motion looks like when it's installed. Not described, not recommended, but installed inside of your business. And that's the gap that I want to close in this next section, is that we have to put these structured motions into play. We have to become that predictable partner, that one that reduces risk, that makes it easy for a Microsoft seller to communicate what you do, how you do it, who you do it for. All of those things have to roll off their tongue for this to become a real, true structured motion that can um, be shared with inside the Microsoft ecosystem. So I want to make this next thing concrete before we go any further, because a structured motion can sound like a framework, like something you study, like something you download and read from microsoftlearn.com, and then it gets filed away. What we're talking about is not that. A structured motion is a change in how you operate. Not what you know, not it's what you do. It's why your Monday mornings are going to look different than any other partners. It's how you show up to a seller conversation looking different. It's what you put in Partner Center and why that looks different. It's how you create and handle co-selling opportunities so that they look different to Microsoft. So, what I want to do is share a little example here of what that looks like in terms of emotion. This partner here. Let me go back for a moment here and say that the example I want to share with you is a partner that has a strong Azure delivery, solid customer outcomes. They've got real capabilities. They've been in the Microsoft ecosystem for just over 6 years now. So they're not new to this game. They're active in the partner program. They have their solution designations or certifications. They even have solid relationships at the Microsoft field level, but consistent pipeline is where they struggle. Not because the sellers dislike them, it's because a seller looks at them and says, uh, you know, where do I plug you in? How do I plug you in? There was no clear story about when to use them and what the problem they solved in the sort of seller lingo, or how a seller communicates. That was where they really struggled. And the Microsoft system did not know how to categorize them. So they just didn't. They just weren't part of this system. Um, they weren't top of mind because they couldn't, no Microsoft seller could articulate where to use them or how to use them. And so what this partner did was they spent 1 quarter installing this motion, not learning from it, but installing it and executing it over and over and over again. And at the end of that opportunity, at the end of that time frame, they were seeing consistent co-sell opportunities in flight. They now had sellers reaching out, not because they had done more or even anything really differently. It's because they had become um, understandable or legible to the system. So a Microsoft seller could put them in a box very quickly and have what I like to call the Rolodex moment. And so just sticking on this example for another minute or so here is that this was not a partner who'd been careless. They had been in the ecosystem for years. They knew how it worked. They had the relationships at the field. They were submitting work, and on paper, they were doing what mattered. Again, the problem was not that they weren't visible from the inside. from the inside, it looked like they were just, Microsoft wasn't engaging. There was no traction with the field. And so from the outside, where Microsoft sellers were looking, until that system changed, nothing was going to change. But when the system changed and they were able to uh, understand that partner, everything changed. Now when a seller pulled up their profile, the signals were no longer incomplete. There was a clear story of when to use them. Their co-sell history was no longer this thin, sort of non-existent thing. After the motion was installed, they still had the same designations, they still worked in the same area, but they were now getting deals from Microsoft because Microsoft knew how and where to connect them. They knew what problems they solved. They were able to articulate that quickly and seamlessly. It was no longer a complicated set of things that they tried to deliver that was all product focused. They shifted from that sort of confusing Me Too message into very clear outcome based messaging that changed the whole relationship that this partner had with the Microsoft field. And so again, we didn't change anything from a solution area. We didn't change the work we were doing or they were doing or the good work they were doing. We weren't changing the outcomes. We were just articulating it in a way that made sense for Microsoft sellers to say, yes, I understand where you fit in. Yes, I see how you reduce my risk. Yes, I see how you make my job easier. So that was the key thing that changed here. Again, we didn't have to change what they were doing. It was just how they were communicating and how they were organizing around the concept of co-selling. So let's break it down into what this looks like more tactically. And you'll see on the slide here these four core components. And most partners treat these four things as separate problems. Messaging is a marketing problem. Partner center is an admin problem, or some might say an admin headache. And then relationships are a business development or a sales problem. And co-selling is just a who knows what program problem, like how to, what to, what is co-selling? But they treat each of these as separate things that need to be addressed. And that separation is exactly where we see these motions break down. Now, when these four things are misaligned, when your messaging says one thing, your partner center signals say another thing, and your co-sell history is either thin or even non-existent, inconsistent, whatever it might be, sellers can't build a clear picture of who you are. And for them, and at the end of the day, what that builds is ambiguity. And when that system produces ambiguity, the seller is going to default to somebody else. Period. End of story. But the flip side to that coin is that when these four things are aligned, when a seller can look you up, see a clear story, understand exactly when to use you, and confirm you've performed in motions like this before, it makes their decision obvious. It makes their decision low risk. That alignment isn't accidental. It does not happen because you have a good relationship or you attend the right event. It happens because you've installed a motion that produces it deliberately. And that being deliberate about this is the critical part. So let me show you what each component actually looks like in practice so that you have some takeaways from today. So again, I'll walk through each of these quickly. not to teach you the whole system, but to make sure you can see the gap between where most partners operate and where the motion takes them. So let me start with messaging first. Most partners describe themselves in terms of capabilities. We do Azure migrations. We implement D365. We build security solutions. That language makes sense to a buyer, um, or sorry, it makes sense to the seller, to the partner, but not so much to the buyer. That buyer it's not asking what you do. They're asking, where do you belong? And think about it in terms of the Microsoft seller. The Microsoft seller is not asking you what you do. What they're asking you is, when does this partner belong in the deal I'm already running? If your messaging can't answer that question in one sentence, you are not going to be in that seller's vocabulary. You know, the motion you install has to answer that question very deliberately around messaging. Next, let's talk about Partner Center and the signals that Partner Center gives off. Partner Center is the most systematically underused asset that I believe we have in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. Most partners are treating it like a compliance requirement, something that we've got to do, a heavy lift, and just really don't see the value in that. The difference is, or the mindset shift that I would ask each of you to consider here, is that Microsoft treats Partner Center like telemetry. Every cert you get, every specialization, every co-sell submission, every PAL association tells the system something about who you are as a partner. And more importantly, where you belong in their world, in their sales world. And so when those signals are weak or inconsistent, sellers who look you up, they are not building confidence in who you are and what you do. But when those signals inside a partner center are strong and deliberately maintained, you surface workflows that you may never have thought about. You surface relationships that you may have never thought, or opportunities you may have never been privy to. So again, Partner Center, treat it like the telemetry that it is for the Microsoft field. Next is relationships, and we've already covered the sort of fragility of relationship first motion. What the installed motion does is it changes the basis of the relationship. Instead of being someone a seller likes, you become someone a seller relies on. And that shift happens because your motion makes their job easier in ways that they can predict. It builds the kind of trust that survives reorgs, and that falls down where personal trust can't sustain. You just because someone trusts you, if they've moved on, they have no stake in your game anymore. But if you've built the relationships on those motions are transferable. And then finally is activation. This is where most of the pipeline breakdown actually happens. Partners submit referrals, they respond to, if they're fortunate enough, they respond to inbound co-sell requests, but they do not have a structured way of creating co-sell opportunities proactively, or handling them in ways that make sellers want to come back. And the motion installs that handling process. And more importantly, when sellers experience it once, that clean handoff, a well-prepared partner, an outcome they can point to, they more times than not will be coming back. And that is how your pipeline gets to a place of predictability. And for me, none of this is theoretical. Every component is installed in a sequence, It's installed inside your actual business. And that's what we're doing at Ryze, is helping people to install these motions, not advise, not train, but install these motions. And it's a motion that we've personally seen repeated both prior to um, building Ryze. Both the whole company, everyone was involved in building Microsoft partners outside of this. These are tested approaches. These are motions that we've built over 15 to 20 years of being in this ecosystem. And so now that brings us to what staying on your current path actually looks like and actually costs. So I'll be very direct here. The cost of not having a structured motion isn't dramatic. Your business isn't folding overnight. It does not show up as a crisis. It doesn't show up as the end of the world. It shows up as another quarter that looks roughly like the last one. And I know this because for the first 2 or 3 years of building my last Microsoft partner back from 2015 to 2020, those first couple of years, they were one quarter after another. The one quarter looked the same as the last one, and there was some nominal growth, but there was never that place that we got to where all of a sudden we were seeing consistent um, pipeline. We were seeing consistent activity. You know, we had some pipeline, some co-sell activity, some relationships that felt promising. But at the end of the day, we had this nagging sense that the business should be doing more with that Microsoft relationship, more than it was doing quarter over the last few quarters that we went through. But we had no clear explanation for why it was that way. And that was the sort of that at the end of the day, that was dangerous. We just kept doing more of the same. There was no obvious failure. There was no sort of massive decline. It was just a little bit of the same every quarter. And every quarter without that structured motion taught the Microsoft system, taught the people inside Microsoft something. And it was that this is who we were. This is kind of what we did. We would kind of show up here. We'd kind of show up there. But there was no clear signals that were being maintained that partners and Microsoft sellers specifically could see, they could relate to, they could understand. And as that pattern compounded, it was in the wrong direction. It wasn't until we realized that we could change that, we had the ability to change that. And so for you, the one question worth sitting on before we wrap up is, it's not, should we eventually install a structured motion or a system? That answer, I think, is pretty obvious from what we talked about here today. The question is, what does another quarter on the current path reinforce inside the Microsoft ecosystem? We're headed directly and squarely into Microsoft's Q1 of FY27. And if we don't influence that change, it's more of the same. So that's the decision that's in front of each and every one of you today. And the next step that I'm going to share with you is designed to sort of help you, each and every one of you, to solve that problem. But before we get to that, I want to be specific about what that conversation is or will be and what it's not. It's not intended to be a sales call. What I'm offering to do is spend 30 minutes telling, helping you uncover what a great system looks like, what that means for your business, it, and what I want to accomplish is, think of it as a working session. We look at your actual Microsoft motion you're running today, where you are today, what the signals are that you're giving off based on what you're doing, understanding what your co-sell history is and what that says about you as a partner, and ideally trying to help you identify where the gaps are in your motion. So if that sounds right for what you want to accomplish, and what you would love to get and understand about your business, then that is what I'm going to share with you now, which is this link to book some time to book a working session uh, with us, and we'll go through that. So the link is on the screen now. I'm happy to stay through Q&A. If you're watching the replay, the same link will work, the same process. Book time directly. There's no deadline on this, but I will say that we are rapidly approaching Q1 of FY27. Microsoft will be looking to find partners that help them move their business forward, whether you focus on the SMB market, SME and C, or enterprise. Microsoft is looking for good partners to fill the shoes of a significant number of opportunities, especially as we move into this more agentic mindset that Microsoft is showing up with that our customers are interested in. So I would encourage each and every one of you to take a moment and book some time. But while this link is up, I wanted to remain on the call for a few minutes and answer any specific questions that you might have. So whether your question applies to what we covered today, I'm happy to address it. If you've got other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A as well. But it's important that you really focus on getting that motion in place today so that as we roll into Microsoft's new fiscal year, you show up in a way that is different from you have done quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter historically, and more importantly, change what the system is telling Microsoft about you and your business. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I'll hang out for a few minutes and answer any questions I can.
Nothing posted in the Q&A so far, Rob.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to hang out for another couple minutes. You've all got the link there, or the QR code, and the URL to book some time. So please feel free, and we will see if we can't help you identify that gap in where you are today versus where you want to be with Microsoft, whether that be to drive more awareness, more leads, more opportunities, more consistent pipeline. That's what we're offering to help identify. So
We just have one comment from David. Agreement in, we've had a few wins on the coastal. I think that's coast. However, never going out there, send it. I'm not sure. I think I'm having a problem understanding that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing, David. I appreciate that. And if there are no other questions, we will wrap up today's call. And thank you for joining us. Much appreciated. And we will.
Oh, we just had a late question come in.
Oh,
Any
sure.
experience with AI-powered workplace community?
Any experience with AI-powered workplace community? I am not sure of the context for the AI-powered workplace community. Are you referring to inside of Partner Center, or yeah, I'm not sure of that. So that's something I'll have to look into, and happy to share more with you if you want to book some time. I can look into it, but I have no experience with the AI-powered workplace community, unless you're referring to the AI capabilities they're releasing inside a Partner Center.
So this is the community for devices.
Oh, yeah. No, I unfortunately do not have any experience in that.
And I think that's everything.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I look forward to meeting you all in the future. Cheers.